Welcome everyone. My name is Jamie Lake. I'm the Executive Director for P.R.I.D.E of Tuscaloosa. P.R.I.D.E Tuscaloosa is the Parents Resource Institute for Drug Education. We are a nonprofit here in the West Alabama area. We specialize in drug abuse and addiction prevention programs. And we're very excited to have you all here with us today. We've got a great event. Our event is a summit called Engage Tuscaloosa. And we've got a number of great guest speakers and a panel group that's going to talk with us as well. And so we're very excited to have you all here. Thank you for joining us. And we are looking forward to having this event. Our guest speaker that I will introduce here momentarily is with me, Ms. Liz Huntley. And then later we will have a Q&A session, panel discussion with our county sheriff, our district attorney, probate judge, and a member of our P.R.I.D.E staff who is a prevention expert in our area here. So without further ado, I will introduce Mrs. Elizabeth Liz Huntley. Liz is the co-founder and the current president of the Hope Institute. She's dedicated her life, as you'll hear about in her speech, for child advocacy. She's an author, she's a lecturer. She has a book, her autobiography called More Than a Bird, she'll talk more about. Tells about her remarkable life story. She has inspired through her life story and her work thousands of students across the nation. She continues to devote her time and efforts to bringing about change and advocacy and hope through education and community organizing and support. And very, very happy to have her here. We've heard her speak already a couple of times, and she gets better every time I hear her, and I'm looking forward to this one today as well. So we will turn it over to Mrs. Liz Huntley.
Good morning, and good morning to those of you who are listening to us out there in our virtual world, right? And I understand that the audience, one of my favorites, part of this audience actually includes students. So I'm particularly excited about that. No offense to you grown folks, but it's always a pleasure to be able to hopefully share something to inspire and help young people as they're walking through this journey called life, towards adulthood. So hopefully I will share something. As my friend Jamie said, I am co-founder of the Hope Institute, but I'm also a lawyer by day and an advocate by triumph, right? So I'm a lawyer at Lightfoot, Franklin & White in Birmingham, and I always love to share this when I'm at Auburn or Alabama. So I serve on the board of trustees at Auburn University where I went to college. Don't kick me out yet, because I also serve on the board of governors at the University of Alabama School of Law, where I went to law school. So in the state of Alabama, that makes me interracial, right? So I'm very proud to be here, but my most important job that I do above anything that I do every day is to be a parent, to my 3 beautiful children. And I have a daughter in grad school in California. I have a daughter that's a sophomore at Vanderbilt University. And I have a 6-year-old son who's a first grader. That's when y'all get to laugh, because God has a sense of humor, right? For me to have a 6-year-old at my age is quite something. It's quite a miracle, actually. But God always knows what you need. I simply can't imagine our life without our precious little AJ. And I will mention this too. I will mention God in my presentation. I'm a person of faith. I don't apologize for it. But when I'm asked to come and present my story, we're kind of a 2 for special, right? It's really difficult for me to share my story without mentioning a true source of my strength and my faith. And no offense to anybody who has a different type of belief, but this is my truth, and I have to share my full truth with you and acknowledge my sources. So having said that and gotten all those preliminary disclaimers out of the way, let me just thank the P.R.I.D.E organization for giving me this opportunity to share at this event. Organizations always have so much to choose from in terms of who they can get to present and what message they want conveyed at their conferences. And it's just an honor and a privilege that you all thought to include me in what's going on today. And I hope that I say something that can somehow affect a life that's listening, even if it's just one. So we've talked a little bit about the Liz of today. But what I'm really going to talk about today is the Liz of yesterday that got me to the Liz of today. And it is completely framed by drug use in all different kinds of perspectives. And you may say, oh, wow, she's about to share a positive story as a recovering addict. And I'm not. And I'm blessed that I'm not sharing that story. But what I will share with you is a story of the impact of drug use on everybody around and my own struggle to not travel that path myself. So let's go back in time, if we will. So my parents were drug dealers. My mom and dad were drug dealers. And when I say they were drug dealers, they were the real deal. I was born in Huntsville, Alabama, and we lived in the Butler Terrace housing projects in Huntsville. And this was the early 70s, and there were 5 of us, 5 kids in that home, and we had 4 different daddies. And my mom had given birth to us from age 16 to 21. You do the math. So by all accounts, it was a very dysfunctional situation, right? So they're dealing drugs, and I remember vividly things like seeing all these people coming and going in our home all the time that I didn't even know. I remember them packing up things and putting them on the table, and money being everywhere, and all of this activity, because they were dealing. This was when heroin was infiltrating the black community in the early 70s, and they were ringleaders of it. And not only were they dealing it there in the Butler Terrace housing projects in Huntsville, but they had people working for them over in Beaufort Court housing projects in Huntsville, and they had people working for them as far west 30 miles into Decatur, Alabama. So they were very enterprising in terms of this drug dealing that they were doing. And even though I was a kid in the midst of all of that chaos, you know, when you're a little kid, all you know is what you see in front of you, right? So that was all I knew. All I knew was all this stuff kind of going on around me. And I had no clue that it was bad stuff. I really didn't. No, but I was getting plenty of food. My parents were drug dealers. There was money, there were clothes, there were cars. I had all my favorite toys. I played with my little friends in the neighborhood. You know, nobody ever hurt us. Our home was clean, and we had stuff, and both of my parents were there, and I had no clue that they were doing all of this stuff. So this dysfunction was my normal, and it was my normal, and it seemed fine because I wasn't being hurt. But we all know that whenever you have that level of dysfunction, particularly when drugs are involved, because drugs create so much unpredictability, especially those in the drug dealing business, right? Because I don't know about y'all, I don't know people that are dealing drugs retiring with their 401k retirement plan. You know, it doesn't work that way, right? You are engaged in an illegal operation where eventually somebody gets tapped, and my parents were no exception. When I was 5, my dad got busted for dealing those drugs, and he went to prison. And while he was in prison, my mom was trying to hold down the drug business herself, but she broke the cardinal rule of drug dealing. She started using their product, heroin, and she became a heroin addict. And for reasons unknown to me to this day, one day my mom packed up our clothes. And it wasn't unusual for us. It was the end of summer, so it wasn't unusual for us to go stay with a grandma or cousins or whatever. She packed up our clothes, and she took me and my younger sister, we had the same father, my dad, the one that went to prison. She took us down to Clanton, Alabama, to my grandmother's house, who lived in the housing projects there in Clanton. And she, courageous woman that had left a violent marriage in the 60s, you know, and was raising the last 3 of her 8 children all by herself, cleaning houses for a living, doing what she needed to do. So she left us there. She took my middle sister to Hueytown, Alabama, and left her at an aunt's house. And she had arranged for my only brother and oldest sister to be in Huntsville with her sister because they had started school. And she went back to that housing project in Butler Terrace, and she went upstairs to her master bedroom, and she took out one of the many guns that they owned, and she committed suicide. So Now I do know I'm in dysfunction, but I learned about it in such a harsh way, because when there's drug activity present and something goes down, there's no planning time. You don't get advance notice. You don't get a chance to try to prepare yourself or whatever. When those things happen, they just happen. Literally, a phone call to my grandmother's house about my mother's suicide, and my whole life got turned upside down and transformed. So now I'm at my grandmother's, and my mom's committed suicide. I'm 5. Mom's committed suicide. I'm separated from my siblings for the first time. My dad's in and out of jail, and I'm experiencing poverty for the first time, being poor. And you may say, wait a minute, you said you were in the housing projects in Butler Terrace. Well, my parents were drug dealers, so there was money and stuff all the time. So I go from all of that to now with my grandmother, who's earning an honest living, and and I go from 3 meals a day or whatever I wanted to eat to now it might be 2 meals a day instead of 3, depending on her situation. And from food just being there to going to the county department at the first of the month, because they didn't give out EBT cards for food stamps back then. Food assistance was food assistance. So you had to go and stand at the county health department and get bags of cheese and blocks of cheese and bags of flour and sugar. That became my new life. And if all of that wasn't enough for me to deal with, within a month of me moving into that house with my grandmother, one of her young adult sons started to sexually abuse me on a regular basis. So, and then there was the domino effect of how this impacted my siblings. So the actions of my parents ended up affecting the actions of all 5 of our lives. Then let's domino effect that. All 5 of our lives, all 5 of the lives of our families, and then ultimately, at some point, that's going to affect the lives of our children and their children. It's a domino effect of the negative impact of drugs. Now, when I wrote my memoir, I didn't go as much into this particular thing, but former Alabama Chief Justice Sue Bell Cobb wrote a book, and she highlighted people in Alabama that had experiences with the court system and experiences with drugs and activity that impacted their life. And as a part of that story, they wanted to include me in this book and sort of my story and what happened with my parents and how it impacted my life. And in including me, they also wanted to interview my father, who was still alive. And so I had the opportunity to participate in an interview with my father and hear from him sort of how this whole thing started, how they got into this whole drug business. And what was interesting is, and unfortunate as it is, my parents were very enterprising. They clearly were very smart. They clearly were leaders. They clearly knew how to manage things, right? They had all these people working for them. They were managing the money and all of the people trying to cut in on their business. And I'm not glorifying this by any imagination, but I'm getting to a point. So I have the genes of people that are pretty smart and enterprising. So the fruit really didn't fall far from the tree, but the only difference are the choices that are made with the talent that God has blessed us with. The choices of my life and what I was going to do with what I had been blessed with in terms of skills and abilities and all of those things. So my parents chose to be drug dealers. I choose to be a hope dealer. That's what I call myself. I'm a hope dealer. I'm doing exactly what they did. Hope Institute and all these things I do through advocacy is nothing but trying to pull together, my crew, if I will, to help us try to deal hope to young people that will listen. And it's important. It's important that we do that and get really real about the real challenges that young people face out there in a world that can create a life of addiction like this in an instant. Because being in that situation that I was in, you think about that. I mean, it's much oppression, and things didn't even get any better in my house. Even when I thought things couldn't get any worse with my uncle and all the stuff that I was dealing with, my grandmother had another adult son who was in the military. Something had happened to him in the military, we don't know to this day, and he became mentally ill. And they discharged him. So now I've got this other uncle living in the house who's mentally ill. And for those of you who live in a community where sometimes there's mental health and nobody knows what to do about it, right? So my uncle was one of those guys that walked the street and would talk to himself and all of this kind of stuff. But he would also, if he got off his medications, he would get really violent. And the violence were so bad that the police were called to our house, and we would have to go into DHR custody and end up in foster homes. Guys, it was just a roller coaster ride of chaos all the time, never knowing what was going to happen. And then on top of that, remember, my grandmother was very poor. So I lived in a neighborhood where drugs were freely, not free, never free, but they were available, and I had access to them. And I had peers that used drugs or other adults that would try to slip them my way. But the hope that I had that prevented me from going down that path, unlike my siblings and the negative impact that it had on their lives, was that I knew that as long as I had an adult advocate, somebody that cared about me, that I had hope. And for the young people listening, I don't care what your home situation is, but if you walk into a school every day, you have hope. You're a part of P.R.I.D.E. You have hope. God always sends people in your life that can help you when the temptation to go and get a hit or to take a drug to make it go away. Don't you know that if I had the power to do it without drug addiction, I could erase all of the terrible experiences that I had as a young person out of my life? I would. If there was something I could buy that wouldn't lead me to drug addiction, that would help me erase it, I would. But the reality is nothing like that exists. We haven't learned how to wipe memories out. And so, but one way that can at least temporarily let it go away is drugs. That's the reality. The reality is we know that drugs give us that temporary euphoria or that feeling of it's just gone for a moment. And I'm not too proud to say that I wasn't even tempted in that way at one point in my life. I remember when I was in high school and just starting to, my grandmother allowing me to sort of, I would say, talk to boys, not necessarily date, like leave off by myself. But in my neighborhood, there were plenty of places to go and nobody knew what you were doing. There were plenty of places, homes to hide in or trees to get behind or whatever. I mean, that's just the reality, right? And there are even more places than that for young people of today. And so the little boy that I was talking to, he smoked pot. And so one day in the woods right there in my neighborhood, I decided that I was going to try it, that I was going to smoke pot. And I did. And I thought I'd gotten away with this, it wasn't so bad, all this stuff. But then that guy, y'all, and I still don't know to this day other than it must have been God for this to happen. I was really successful in school, and I was doing all these things, and I was a cheerleader and had great grades and all this stuff. And he felt bad about exposing me to that pot. And this kid went with his guilty conscience and told my grandma on me. Now, the person that gave me the pot went and told my grandma that I had smoked pot with him. Can y'all believe that? And so he goes and he tells my grandma, and you have to know my grandma, she was a hard taskmaster. You hear me? She didn't play. And I have to admit, the disappointment, and I got the corporal punishment as well, but the corporal punishment was nothing compared to the disappointment in her face and what she said when she had that talk with me after she found out. She looked at me and she said, Elizabeth, she called me Elizabeth. It's like, Elizabeth, how could you? Look at what drugs has done to this entire family. Look at what drug use has done to your life. So how could you even think about, how do you know people, and this is what she didn't use the fancy words people use about chemical makeup and propensity to addiction and all of those fancy things that y'all learn about here, but she said, knowing what happened to your mama and daddy, how do you know your body won't respond that way to where you'll do what they did? It's like, why would you take that chance when you have everything that you have and the chance to have more than that? And I thought about what she said, and boy, was she right. It's just not worth it. The temporary feeling of euphoria is not worth it. I've come to learn that I observed two things. And again, I'm not an expert in this space. I'm just a person with a lot of experience in this space. I came to learn two things that I observed in my community around the people that I watched regularly use drugs and become addicted. And there were usually two ways that happened. It was either to cope with unhappiness, because it gave a temporary feeling of happiness, whether it was not happy with their job, where their life was, all these things. And a lot of times you never know what a person is struggling with behind their eyes, even in places where it looks like everything was okay. But it was coping with how they felt, which could have really been a mental health issue that could have been addressed in a different way other than becoming a drug addict. But they were finding their own way to try to cope with that. Or it was about socialization. For some people, it was simply about, my friends are doing it, or I want to look cool, or I want to fit in, and I want to be a part of the group. I don't want to be left out. I don't want to look like I'm not cool. Everybody's doing it. Having raised these girls that are now in college, my home was sort of the hangout home, and I got to hear the kids talking and hear what was going on all the time. For you parents out there, the best way to know what's going on is to have the teenagers around, because they will talk and they will tell everybody's business. And you hear all kind of stuff going on. You're just in the kitchen cooking, ordering pizza, doing your thing, accommodating the kids hanging out. But you really get to learn their peers and you get to learn them. And I heard things that just shocked me about kids that were in great homes with great families with plenty of financial resources and education and all of the things that you would think would be the things that would be the magic recipe to make sure your kids don't even think about drugs or think about going down that path. And it would blow my mind. And sometimes it would start from, they made a ball team, a sports team, and there's a cluster of kids on that team that does, and they want to fit into the new team and they want to seem cool, right? Or it's a new friend group that they've identified in school because they don't want to be they want to look cool or whatever. And then for some of the kids, it was really, the way it was described to me were things that they were struggling with. Now, do I know whether or not they were fully diagnosed depression? I don't know. But I know that there were things that they were struggling with. There were issues that they had. And so in the peer groups is where I saw it happen, and in the need to be able to try to find some happiness in the midst of a tough time in your life that you're coping with, and it may be where you've landed. And, when I heard my dad tell the story of how he And my mom got started in that. It was a little bit of that as well. They had a couple from New York that was visiting with them that was telling them about this latest, greatest thing with the heroin, and let them try it to see what it felt like. And they're like, that marijuana stuff, that ain't nothing. This is the stuff. This is what they need to do. Showed them sort of how to do it. My mom was working a job as like a nurse's assistant or something, not making a lot of money. We were living in the projects. So they were tempted in by the promise of the money, by the promise of the financial resources that would be yielded by it. And it did happen. But like everybody that goes down that path, and I've already told you the end of that story, it can't sustain itself forever. Now, let me say this. As my dad was telling me about the story, at that point in his life, now he passed 2 years ago, but at that point in his life, he was in a halfway house in Georgia. And he was in a halfway house in Georgia with nothing to his name. He'd accumulated nothing in his life, no job, living from the assistance of other people. His body beat up and destroyed. He was on dialysis because of the damage he had done to his body with drugs. But at least at that stage of his life, at the end of his life, even though he had not had a real relationship with us, his children, he was mentoring young men in that recovery program in Georgia and had made such an impact in sharing his story, sharing the what not to do, and trying to get the young men that were in the recovery program to take a positive direction and not end up where he is, that his impact was so great that they ended up naming one of the homes after him in Georgia. And when we buried him, the director of that recovery program came over and delivered a beautiful eulogy on his behalf. So I am grateful that at the end of his life, he took that turn and tried to use it for good. But let's talk about what happened to my siblings and all of us as a result of those decisions that were made related to drugs. My only brother, when I forgot what age he was, but because he was old enough and saw that drug life and everything that was going on, he thought, well, I'm here with my Aunt Betty Jean in this crowded house and we have nothing going on. I want the money. I want the stuff. So he ran away and went to one of his groups that allowed him to be a dealer and started dealing drugs. Well, no, he wasn't a dealer. He wasn't running it. He was working for people. And he was dealing those drugs. And then one day, I get called into the office in school, and they tell me that my brother was found dead in a body of water, and nobody knows what happened to him. My oldest sister ended up at 16 getting pregnant and marrying a guy that she thought was in a good family who turned to drugs and was a drug addict and put her on drugs, or he didn't put her on drugs. She had to make the choice. She had these 2 boys with him in a very violent marriage. All of this stuff happened to her. Terrible young adult experiences as a result of just literally doing the things that my parents did. In fact, they actually lived in the exact same housing project, Butler Terrace, not the same actual structure we lived in, but literally you could see it from her back window. Just the pattern. My middle sister, Pam, that was in Hueytown, Alabama. Now, let me say with Pookie, my oldest sister, she eventually left that horrible marriage, and she eventually got herself together, married the love of her life. Now she owns her own home and doing her own thing, but she still has the consequences of making those choices. Now, when I talked to her about, why did you go down that path, knowing what you knew, because she was the oldest, she was very well aware of what was going on at the time my mother committed suicide. And for her, it was about trying to find a way out and thinking this family that this guy was with was going to help her. And really, what's interesting is she really adored and loved her mother-in-law. That was really her draw more to the family, I think, than Antonio. And it's interesting. I was at my niece's graduation a couple of years ago, and she and her ex-mother-in-law are still close to this day. She was looking for an advocate, right? She was looking for somebody to help and guide her. My middle sister, Pam, in Hueytown, the house that she stayed in, she was subjected to abuse, to sexual abuse and emotional abuse. Lots of things happened to her there. And she had decided, you know what, I want out of here, but I have no idea where to go. See the consequences. Here we all are off in these places that my mother has strategically placed us, that I guess in her mind at the time, she thought we were better off. Well, I know she did, because that's what she left in her suicide letter, that we were better off without her, you know, to be put in these places, because things had gotten to a point where they were unsafe where she was. And Pam ended up starting to steal and ended up in the juvenile system and having a baby at an early age and all this stuff. And when you talk to her about that, it's really interesting. That's why I hate it when people judge young people about their behavior and they look at them and they say, what's wrong with you? And the question might be, what's happening to you? Because young people respond to environmental things, to changes in life, to things that are happening to them. And so she said, I was afraid that if I reported what was happening to me, that DHR would get involved, and then we would end up, they'd go through their little process. I might be taken out of the house for a while, but eventually I'd be put back there. Then it was going to be 10 times worse than it was when I started. So I decided that I was going to get out through the juvenile system. So she literally started stealing and doing things as her way to find somebody to pull her out of there. She decided that the juvenile system and juvenile homes was a better place for her than being in that home with my aunt, because it was so horrific. When young people make decisions, they think like young people. They make decisions about how they're going to cope and deal with things from a young person's perspective, from the limited information that they know. That's why as parents, it is so important for us to know our kids, know their friends, know what's going on, know who they're connected with. It's so important. And then my youngest sister, Nicole, and Pam ended up, now she is using her life for good and helping young people in that space in Hueytown and working to help people that need help with assisted living type things. But it was a long journey for her to get there. And then my younger sister, Nicole, that lived in the same house with me, we went to the same church, we went to the same school, we had the same things, ended up getting pregnant at 14 and having a baby. That completely changed her life. Ended up marrying a guy who was a drug dealer and moving away without family support, and had times where she attempted suicide. You see the domino effect here? You see what happens when drugs become present? Drugs are so, oh my God, they're so toxic, not just to the individual that consumes it, but to all of those that are affected by now this individual who doesn't act rationally. They act in response to now this drug, and it affects everybody around them. And I've seen that happen, like I said, in really nice home with great resources and all of that, and I've seen it happen in poor homes. It's always been around me. And so I jumped at an opportunity to be able to share my story in hopes that it will make somebody stop and think, in hopes that it will make a parent not just assume that everything's okay and not look deeper into what's going on, because you should. But I'm going to close with this, and I'm happy to answer any questions because that may create a better conversation. I'm going to close with this. So when I wrote my little book, More Than a Bird, I named it More Than a Bird for a reason. And I'm going to tell you, because particularly you young people, no matter what your circumstance is, like I said, as long as you have access to an adult that cares for you, you have hope. So in all of these things that are going on with me, I'll never forget probably my most hopeless hour in my life that I can remember was when I was in the 3rd grade, and it was the last day of school. And it was the last day of school for the summer. So now for a lot of kids, the last day of school is like, oh, it's a happy time. I mean, for my kids, it's camps, it's swimming, it's going on vacations and all of that stuff. But for me, the last day of school was a sad day, because now I'm about to go into my reality 24/7, 7 days a week for 10 straight weeks. Now, I'm married to a teacher. Don't get me wrong. They need that break. They need that emotional break in the summer to recharge and deal with what they have to deal with every day as educators in our school system. But for some children, that break is a tough, tough time, and I was one of them. And I remember sitting on that bus, and I just started crying. And I didn't just cry. I wept. I wept because I was leaving my one little buffer for life, right? My precious school. It was kind of my drug, right? It was the thing that did make me feel better. It was the one place where no adults hurt me. It was the one place where my mind was stimulated to learn. It was the one place where I knew I was going to get a meal. It was the one place where I felt like a kid. And it hurt that now I'm about to go into this reality 24/7. So I'm just crying as the bus is pulling away from the school and the school is fading in the distance. But then 2 weeks after that, my Aunt Liz invited me to this little church with her. And I went not because I wanted to go learn about God. I mean, I went to church with my grandmother every Sunday. We didn't have children's church. I just sort of sat there in my little clothes and whatever. I went because it was a Wednesday night Bible study, and it got me out of my house at night when the bad stuff happens. People want to out, right, when things make them feel bad. And so I go with her to this little church, and never forget this. We sat down in the little church, and the preacher said, okay, I want everybody to get out your Bibles, and if you don't have one will be provided to you. Well, that was different. Nobody had ever asked me to read the Bible before. But because of school, I could read. And guys, I could read really well. And thank goodness I could read really well. They gave me a King James version of the Bible. So they give me this Bible, and we're reading through all these stories of hope about this God that had helped all these people overcome all this bad stuff in their life. And so I'm reading this with my own eyes, and we ended that night in the book of Genesis with the story of Joseph. Now, you people of faith listening know about the story of Joseph, and you people that don't subscribe to that faith, you have to hear this story and know that it's pretty powerful. It's a story of hope, because Joseph, y'all know that family was a hot mess. I mean, let's put it in today's context. You had 10 boys, and they had 3 or 4 different baby mamas, and 2 of those baby mamas were sisters, and they all lived in the same place. Now think about that. That is a hot mess. And so Joseph was daddy's favorite, and he let everybody know he was his favorite. He bought him this little coat of many colors, and Joseph strutting around all in his little coat, and his brothers got so jealous of him, right? So then Joseph has this dream that everybody's going to be bowing down to him. So he's bragging about his little dream, and he tells his little brothers about it, and those boys get so mad at that boy that they go out and they sell him into slavery and come back and tell the daddy that he had got killed by an animal. Y'all, that is trifling. We would call that human trafficking today, wouldn't we? I mean, you think about it. I mean, Joseph was a lad, so he was like 16, 17 years old. All of a sudden, your brothers sell you into slavery and go back and tell your daddy that you got killed so he doesn't have a reason to pursue and look for you to try to find you? And so he's in slavery, and all this stuff happens to him. He ends up in prison. He's beaten in prison, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of that beautiful story, Joseph had been elevated as governor of Egypt. And in that capacity, not only had he saved his family from famine and starvation, he saved 2 nations from famine and starvation. So I'm sitting there and I'm reading this story. I'm thinking about my own life, and I'm thinking to myself, well, if this God can help Joseph and he went through all this bad stuff, maybe he can help me. So I leave that night, and all I can think about is that Bible, those stories of hope, because I was so hungry for some hope. And I get back the next Wednesday, and we read through several scriptures, and we ended that night in Matthew 6:26, and I'll paraphrase. It says that if God will take care of the fowls of the air, and they neither sow nor reap, then he'll take care of his children. Aren't they better than a bird? Now, think about it. Think about birds. I mean, you don't have to be a person of faith to get this. Think about birds. They tweet all the time. You know why? Because they get it. The birds are like, I ain't worried about nothing. Those two-legged human people, they gonna build bird baths. They gonna build bird houses. They gonna do all their yards around us. They gonna take pictures of us. They gonna give us their food in the park. I mean, what do birds have to worry about? People just take care of them, right? And so the preacher was saying, well, if he'll take care of the birds, wouldn't he take care of his children? Now, and y'all be patient with me, because no matter how many times I do this, this place is always so hard. Because the tragedy in that moment was that as I sat there and he was trying to tell us we're more than a bird, I struggled because it seemed like the birds had it better than I did. But then he said this. He said, you know that you're more than a bird because God will send people to love you. He will send people to love you, even when the folks aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing in your life. Now, Liz, how in the world does that connect to what we're doing today? I am standing in the room with this board of P.R.I.D.E in the midst of people that love you, that are out there in this listening audience, virtually. People that love you, whether you subscribe to that as a biblical perspective or not. We're human beings that are connected to each other and have a natural affinity within us, wherever you derive that comes from, to help one another. And to you young people, the people that are in your life that are helping you, giving you the information, giving you resources today to help you through that tough journey called life. Simply people that love you. And when I heard that, it was like a light bulb came on in me. Because at that moment, all I could think about was my school, people in my community that he had sent to love me. And because of that, faith came into my heart, and I professed Christ that night and began my spiritual journey, my choice of learning how to live my life through the Word of God. And I stayed on my natural journey of using education and community engagement. That's the great equalizer. People like people in this room, people in your school, people in your church, if you attend church, that are in your life to help provide those resources to help you, that give you hope for a better life without resorting to drugs for a temporary feel-good. So I'm here to deal a little hope and to remind you of where that hope is. You know, God don't do the old school thing like he used to do with Moses and come down in the burning bush. He left one great commandment, and that is that you love one another. And when you do that, it all takes care of itself. So I want to say thank you to P.R.I.D.E for having me today to be a part of this conference. And I want to say thank you to the parents and the students that are listening for giving me your attention as you think about how you navigate this journey called life and avoid the pitfalls of drug use and addiction that can totally derail not just you, but those that love you, as they did in my family. So I wish you all the best. Thank you so much. And I think we have a minute or two. I'm happy to answer any question that y'all think the listening audience might benefit from a response to.
Yeah, thank you, Liz, so much. We appreciate it. Your story is so inspiring, and how you were able, despite everything that happened and everything you were surrounded with, to overcome that and be as successful as you are is truly inspirational. I think it serves as a great example of how, no matter how tough things can get, or no matter how much life can throw at us, there's always hope, there's always a way to overcome and to make good decisions, either through bad influence or good influence or some combination of both, as in your case. So very inspiring, and we appreciate you so much. The things that you said were very just key to what we do and the things that we say every day in the outreach work that we do. It's almost like you and I rehearsed it and we didn't. You just knew what to say, and we appreciate that very much. Thank you
so much.
Does anybody have a question they want to ask?
Yes, ma'am.
How heavy was the role of foster care services in your life? Were you in foster care for a long period of time? Did that sway you one way or another as it may have for your siblings?
Did it sway me towards what? So the question was, what was the impact, in case somebody can't hear listening, what was the impact of foster care on my life? And did it sway me towards what I do now, or in what way? How did it impact me? So, there's a good and a bad, right? So, and you'll read about this in my book if you read it. The hardest chapter, if you can believe this, the hardest chapter for me to write in that book, that took me weeks to just process it, was the first time we were removed and went to foster care. And we actually went to a home where the lady, the first place we were placed, was very loving and kind to us, and all. She was in our community, so she was somebody we knew and all of that. But the amount of sort of distrust in life that can create when you go home one day, like in my case, and you walk in and there are social workers there waiting to put you in a car, throw your stuff in a garbage bag, and take you somewhere where you have no clue where you're going. And so you think about that. You think about, you go home one day and all of a sudden somebody's saying, you're not going to be here anymore. Get your stuff and let's go. That's harsh. And so that starts to create this sort of sense of uncertainty in always getting to be in the same place, or people being committed to do what they need to do to keep your environment the way that it should be. It creates this sort of sense of instability within you that isn't fair for any child. You should always know you're going to go home, right? And so when going home is not an option, and then not only that, now after that, they did a much better job of placing us with extended family and not as much in the foster home situation. But that's tough. You think about that. You're in an environment where you now know that things are so unstable that DHR is watching, and if something goes off kilter, then you could end up back in foster care again. Nobody, I don't care how bad your home is, and I've worked with thousands of children as a guardian ad litem and all of this over the years, you still want to be with your family, perfect or not. And so that's really harsh. What it did do for me in terms of my adult life is one of the biggest reasons I was a guardian ad litem for 8 years for abused and neglected children, and represented hundreds of children that were like me, in that space. And also my daughters started this thing we call it Operation Birthday Wish, because I was telling them about, a time in foster care when I wasn't at home on my birthday. My birthday is Christmas Eve, so I already have to compete with Jesus Christ for attention. So it's a tough time to have a birthday, and then to not be in your home, it's really disruptive. And people always remember foster kids at Christmas. Because why? It's almost kind of selfish. It makes us feel good. We got all these things reminding us of the season of giving and all of that stuff. But it's really those day-to-day struggles for kids in foster care that are the hardest. You know, when society prompts us to think about the less fortunate, we all come running again. We feel good and we deliver stuff. And so we started Operation Birthday Wish in my county, and we make sure every foster kid in Chilton County gets their birthday wish granted. They get to submit a list of 3 things that they want. Sometimes it's, you know, as big as I want my nails done, something a girl never gets, or as small as some little girl last week is, I just want a My Little Pony doll that I can comb her hair, you know. I mean, whatever it is, but it's about them knowing that somebody cares that today they were on the earth another year, because you start to wonder about purpose and why are you here and value, you know, of yourself. So it had a tremendous impact on me, not only during that time in my life, but also in part of the advocacy work that I do in outreach for young people. Any other questions? Well, y'all are an easy audience. You have a question?
I was going to ask you about your grandmother. Mm-hmm. You mentioned her a little bit, but as you grew up and over time, your relationship with her, and how was she ever able to really understand the impact that she had in your life and help you on your path? What was that relationship like?
You know, I really hope that she did. And you asking that question is going to get me all in my feelings. That woman was selfless. I mean, everything she lived for and got up and did every day was about her children. And then after we got there, about her grandchildren. You know, working, going and doing what she did, trying to get us to church, you know, trying to instill values. And, you know, there were basically 4 things about her that we never said, but we kind of understood, right? Number 1, church every Sunday, door open, we were there. She believed in that. Number 2, you mind your elders. Now, DHR might have arrested her if they knew how she made us mind our elders, but she was old school, so we minded our elders. And number 3, you were clean. Now, we may have lived in the housing projects, but I promise you, you could have eaten off our floor. She had this saying. She said, clean don't cost a dime. Anybody can be clean. And then number 4, she believed in the education. She believed in the resources that were available for kids in education and the opportunities it was going to give her kids that she didn't have. And so, you know, was she perfect? No. Did she make mistakes that caused us to endure pain, like the foster care and a bunch of other things that happened in the home? Yes. But at the end of the day, she was doing the best she could with what she had. And she loved us. Loved us probably more than herself. I hope she knew that. I'll never forget, when I was in high school, she ended up being sick with lung cancer. She smoked all the time, cigarettes. That was her thing, right? People find a vice. We talked about this coping thing. And I mean, she just chain smoked, just all the time, always smoking. And so to no one's surprise, she died of lung cancer. But I'll never forget, when I graduated from high school, she had become too fragile to be there. And I was valedictorian in my class. I was headed to Auburn on a full scholarship, and she wasn't able to come into the auditorium and witness, you know, really a lot of her hard work. But I came to see her in my cap and gown and my valedictorian medallion, and I'll never forget, she was sitting in a wheelchair on the porch, and tears were just streaming down her face. And I just hugged her, and I think she knew that, I hope she knew that I wouldn't have been there without her. Truly. People in your life that love you, if you got it, whether it's from a friend or a family member, whoever it is, cherish it. Cherish that somebody loves you and cares about you. And above all things, respond to it. They see something in you, and they believe in you, and they believe in what you're able to do. And the push that they're doing, like she did us, because she pushed hard. It was all about school, perfect grades, doing this, doing that. It was for a reason. Because I wouldn't be here and being the person that I am had it not been for that. Thank you for acknowledging her.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, at this time we will have a short break, and then we'll come back here in a few minutes and be ready for a panel discussion. At that time, I'll introduce our panel members, and we'll move forward with asking questions from our community leaders. Thank you. Okay, welcome back to the second part of our summit. We hope everyone enjoyed the words from our guest speaker, Ms. Huntley, and the comments that she had to make in telling her life story. The second part of our summit here will be a panel discussion and a conversation that we'll have with our community members as well as the leadership that we have here on the stage with us. So I'm going to introduce the leaders here, and then I'm going to get out of the way, and we're going to start with the questions. So the first one we have here is our Honorable Judge Rob Robertson. He is the probate judge for the County of Tuscaloosa. Our Sheriff Ron Abernathy, is the Tuscaloosa County Sheriff. Our DA, Mr. Hayes Webb, is the District Attorney for Tuscaloosa County. And then we have our very own Ms. Nicole Shine. She is the P.R.I.D.E Prevention Director. She's a certified prevention specialist, and she has a number of years of experience in the field, and she's going to talk with us as well. So, Nicole, I'm going to pass it off to you, and you're going to get everything started.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to start off with several questions from me, and then you guys will be able to meet our staff. Several of them that work in different areas outside of Tuscaloosa, you'll be able to meet them. So the first question is going to go to DA Webb. What are the larger community effects you see for opioid-related crimes?
I think it's difficult for me. I know this is an opioid, specific presentation today, but it's difficult for me to separate effects of opioids versus other substance abuse, and I think it's very unfortunate, the effect on our community, to see the other crime associated with it in particular. We have burglaries, auto burglaries, thefts, and I think that there's an incredible sort of distrust it builds within families and stuff when we have people typically stealing from their family members, friends, loved ones, that sort of thing. And also, one of the consequences of the substance abuse is not just those sorts of property crimes. Also, just last week, our office tried a murder case that was I think probably meth fueled, and we did 2 years ago also had a capital murder case. And the strange thing about it is, because we a lot of times talk about drugs in the community, and we know that drug sales lead to issues and fights and gunfights and killings. But here, the unique thing to me that I see with the methamphetamine abuse is that it is amongst friends, and the people get so worked up and out of their minds, and again, it seems unique in consequence to the use of that drug, is that it's friends killing friends, and in horrible, horrible fashion. So again, opioids I can't really single out. I will say this, is that opioid users, I think, or abusers commonly are not, don't fit the typical criminal sort of profile otherwise. We did something a couple of years ago, and it was called Chasing the Dragon, to educate local community leaders about the dangers of opioid use. And one of the things was, we had scout leaders there, cheerleading coaches, church, pastors. We wanted leaders from the community for them to recognize that their good children frequently were the ones who were, winding up abusing opioids. And a lot of times it would not be known until, the child was in tremendous distress or had overdosed.
Yep. Well, thank you for that. And one thing that really stuck out with what you just said, addiction affects everyone, not just African Americans, not just Caucasians, not just poor, not just rich. It affects everyone across all lifespans, every economic background. So thank you for that. All right, our second question is going to go to our probate judge. What support are you providing to families of convicts of opioid users?
In probate court, usually what we do, this is a civil process having to do with involuntary commitment. Someone that's allegedly suffering and needing treatment. Oftentimes, and we are seeing a growing trend of the dual diagnoses. Okay, they either have permanent damage from drug use or ongoing drug use intertwined with mental health issues. It's very hard to separate. As District Attorney Webb said, it's hard to delineate just opioids. It's the same case in probate court when it comes to mental illness. It is there, and it is a part of it. An important thing to know is that under Alabama law, I cannot commit someone to a rehab, okay? As you notice, almost all rehabs in the court appointed, they're required. They have to opt to go to rehab. And frankly, rehab does no good unless you really are ready and choose to go to rehab, as we all know. So the law supports that in probate as well when it comes to someone that has an alleged mental illness. So we are limited, I am limited to what can be forced upon somebody that we know drugs are a big part of the problem, and they may not be the only part. You get into those situations, you're trying to determine which came first. The mental illness, are they self-medicating with illicit drugs or abusing prescription drugs, whichever it is? Or the other way around, did the drugs cause the situation we're in when they're sitting in my court as a last resort? So as far as support goes, I can say another one of my duties is chairing our county commission here. And it is something that affects our whole county. The family dynamics, there's a cost, not only social, but economic cost involved in anyone. If the breadwinner is no longer able to be productive due to an opioid addiction, you just rippled through that whole family, whatever that family structure looks like. Oftentimes there's not much left of it. And then the youngest end up being the biggest victims that are kind of left out there on their own. You've got parents that are in disarray. Oftentimes it's not just one, it's both parents that are involved in some type of activity. So the support, to answer the core question, comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes. Unfortunately, none of them were great solutions. They're just Band-Aids trying to support and help folks get through the damage that it causes, whether it's at the jail or whatever mechanism that is. But there's really no one thing I can put my finger on and say, we do this to support, because it comes in so many shapes, sizes, and needs. That's the best I can answer that.
Well, thank you for that. All right, Sheriff Abernathy, you're up next. All right, so what are the secondary follow-up crimes to opioid use? Do offenses tend to be found in groups? For example, do people commit robberies while high? Do they commit violent crimes in order to obtain their fix, etc.?
That is correct to a certain level as far as groups. The driving force is for them to get money to buy that drug. That's the bottom line. And like the judge talked about, there's ramifications across the entire family. Are they going to burglarize places? Typically what happens is at first they're going to go through all the money they have, because nobody, and like you talked about earlier, I don't care at what level you are economically, it's going to impact you dramatically, okay? And pretty much no one really can afford it. That's just the truth of it, the impact that will happen out of this. So what you usually see occur is they're going to go through their own funds until they exhaust those. And then they're going to start borrowing money. And then that's going to evolve to where they're stealing from their family members. So they're going to burglarize from their family members. They're going to go and steal their medication from their grandparents. And then they're going to be dealing with that and want to know where it's at and have to call the doctors and have to go through all these types of scenarios. And from there, it actually becomes, and what you'll see, you get into, and like Hayes was talking about, it actually evolves into domestic violence situations where you will come across where a number of times there will be true altercations between these children and their parents. It's unbelievable. I've seen situations where they have actually hit a grandparent, struck them in a way to do harm now. And you sit there and you think, how is that even possible? What, y'all think about it. What would it take y'all today to go assault your grandmother? If you ask me, I would say that was impossible, right? But that shows you the drive of this drug out here. And that's what you're dealing with. So not only do we have the burglaries, we have the domestic violence situations, you have the forgeries from prescription issues there. So those are really the main things. Now, a lot of times you will see them together from time to time, but it's typically smaller groups. It's whoever. It's not like a gang real environment. It's more of whoever their friends are, because they typically are going to hang out with who's doing the types of activities that they're doing. So that's typically what we run into.
And with that, you truly know that addiction is a disease, because like you said, nothing would make me want to hit my grandmother. Absolutely nothing. So we're going to hand it over to our Executive Director, Jamie. He's going to ask the next question for the panel.
Thank you, Nicole. This is kind of a joint question for Sheriff Abernathy and District Attorney Webb. In the last 18 months with the pandemic, what changes have you seen in terms of, or have you seen changes, increases in arrests and convictions and people appearing, before courts and those types of things that may be associated with drug use and that potential increase due to the pandemic?
To me, I don't have numbers specifically. I haven't noticed any increase, though. I think it's just a constant, unfortunately.
I don't think we've really seen as much of an increase at all, maybe even potentially a slight decrease. But I think it really has more to do with the mobility of our community today, because with COVID, you don't have the interaction at the level it was beforehand, so you don't see as much of it transpiring. Now, is it happening all the time? Absolutely. We see it all the way from the jail. Especially any type of synthetic type drug situation that we're running into now, which is having massive effects. And even like the judge was referring to, we just had one just the other night where, you got patrol officers dealing with somebody that we actually send to North Harbor, but it's going to be based on their drug activity that's led to that mental health potential issue, because our guys really don't know what they're dealing with. And so those are the types of things that you're running across.
If I could add some recent data that I was provided looking at deaths in Alabama since beginning of the pandemic. If we look at the beginning of 2020, the main onset being about March of 2020, but we were having pretty steady death rate from overdose in Alabama up until, I'd say, and I've got some data here, looks like it go back to about 2015, but we'd see a pretty even trend line. But beginning 2020, we saw it really start spiking up. Now, it's a combination of course, issues. There's a lot of people with time on their hands. There's stimulus money out there. There was a lot of overdoses that took off in Mississippi and Alabama when the checks hit the ground. And that's a sad part of stimulus, but it happened. But that's real. We're seeing people, for whatever reason, and it may just be the situation we're in. There's a lot of people, I see a lot more depression, serious depression, that they have then been trying to self-medicate or gotten into other problems with mental health during the pandemic. So I think that's something to be mindful of, that the outcomes are far worse that we're seeing with the pandemic going on for various reasons.
Well, I will say this also. We actually, when you got people staying at home over the last year, you've got cash money handed. If you go out if you look at the banks and credit unions, there's more deposits now than ever. So, but yet a lot of them aren't actually working. So what does that lead to? It's kind of like what I say, like with your kids, if you don't have them doing something productive, they're going to find something to do. And unfortunately, a lot of times those things are things they probably shouldn't be doing. and like the judge talking about with the deaths and stuff, what we're dealing here, and it always irritates me so bad whenever I hear the word synthetic marijuana. Okay, y'all have all heard this. Okay, well, this is not marijuana we're dealing with in any form or fashion. Okay, they're making this stuff in the tubs. They're getting, they're spraying paper with it and smoking it. The effects that this has on somebody is basically like LSD is what you're really dealing with. This has long-term effects on individuals. This has serious health issues fairly quickly. And so you're starting to see a lot more severe things come out of it, because I think a lot of times people don't understand the seriousness of it because when they sit there and think about a synthetic marijuana or even a prescription like OxyContin or whatever, well, somebody takes it, yeah, they do, but they're not eating it like candy. Right. And that's what it leads to.
And also, they're not taking it with other things. If that's their prescription, they're taking it as prescribed. They're not abusing it and taking it with other things like alcohol or lacing it with other things. So that's something to think about as well.
Absolutely. She's hitting a nail on the head right there, because that is what's happening out there.
Can I have one more just add quickly also? Is about the opioids and the overdose deaths. And this is purely anecdotal, but anytime law enforcement's informed of a death, then I also get an email about it. And it's something that, and again, it's purely anecdotal, but it seems to me, historically I would have thought of youngsters, right? College age being ones that would overdose, just taking too much of this or too much of that. And then completely unexpectedly dying now because they took too much. But I've seen also now, and speaking of the depression that's gone hand in hand with the coronavirus, the pandemic, is I've seen a lot more older people now that are dying from overdoses of opioids and other drugs. So it's very interesting. It's very sad, but it is interesting to note now, again, as we talk about substance abuse being a problem for everybody, all demographics, but now to see also these overdose deaths seeming to trend, across the board more so than in that kind of younger demographic where I think we would have seen it primarily in the past.
I think isolation has a lot to do with it. When you think about older people, they're used to their grandchildren coming, their parents coming, their children coming to check on them and stuff, and you not having that interaction. That isolation will definitely get you.
There's no question. Yeah, and a lot of these are 60s and 70s, yeah, and who have not been having a lot of interactions with other people.
Thank you. I'm Sarah Beverly. I'm a prevention specialist with P.R.I.D.E of Tuscaloosa. And this question is for the probate judge. Have you seen an increase in opioid-related admissions into psychiatric and mental health facilities given the rise in mental health issues with the pandemic, but also with drug use?
I can't say I've seen an increase that's clearly labeled as opioid. But part of that is due to the fact sometimes it's layered issues going on. So they may abuse opioids, but it's wrapped in with other substances, and it's also they have an existing documented mental health need. So it's kind of peeling that onion layer by layer, trying to figure out what the real issues are. I don't review the talk screens when people come in. Sometimes there's testimony to that effect if they had a dirty talk screen. Unfortunately, these synthetics that we brought up, they don't pop on the talk screen when they come in. So you still are kind of wondering, they're acting like a certain way, but it will not be affirmed through that talk screen in their blood work. But as far as opioids, it is something that definitely happens. I will say as an employer too, we've got approximately 500 employees in the county commission, the deputies, and we've got, of course, the jail, road and bridge, just general government workers that work for the county. We've wrestled with it from an employer standpoint. We had, not a lot, but there have been, in one case in particular, that was clearly an opioid addiction. They had a back surgery, very common, started with prescription, and then one thing led to another, and it became very obvious to administration that this person is well beyond needing pain relief. In fact, we had to take some actions, and this really was, I think, more prevalent. Some of the safeguards that have been put in place in the last couple of years, I think, have curbed. And that's what brought it to light, because when they restricted the ability or the practices of the recommended doses the physicians were writing, of course, some of the addicts, and some of them were genuine. They weren't getting enough to control their pain. But then you had others that were just having to come apart because they were getting cut. The supply was getting cut. And we saw that from an employer standpoint as well. So both sides, clearly it's a piece of the puzzle. But, I know that I see the trends that come into the court. I see chronic marijuana use a lot. And believe me, over time, every psychiatrist I've had sitting in front of me saying there are issues. Anything you put in your body on chronic, long-term, heavy use, chances are, as far as chemicals, it's going to take its toll. We have that, but the synthetics, no question. I have the college students that are there that, they tried this, they thought it was just something kind of fun, and whether or not they ever return to normal, if they don't do it within 5 years, they're not going to, is usually the testimony. So there's a lot of mixture in that, to answer your question.
Let me add a little bit to that, where y'all understand there's been some dramatic strides in the right direction to help us get help for our community that the judge has been instrumentally involved in. I don't know if y'all are aware, we have mental health officers out on the street. We have crisis intervention training for all the deputies and most all in law enforcement in Tuscaloosa County. He dramatically increased the number of mental health officers out there. Well, y'all know one of the problems we have is people with mental illness self-medicate to treat it, okay? Well, once it goes through that process, so we can actually evaluate, instead of immediately taking that person to jail, maybe that person actually needs to go to the hospital. We have that option today, way more than what we had in my previous years, okay? Then you move from there to you go even to the jail setting, and we have a mental health court now that allows for it. We have a psychiatrist in the jail, which there's probably not another one in the state of Alabama that's got one. We've got a psychiatric nurse practitioner, we have a group therapy person, we have a full-time social worker there in the jail, and we work along with Indian Rivers to address these issues. Now, what that does is it allows us to figure out what the true problem is. Is it really a mental health issue, or is it a drug problem? Because y'all know that's what we have to do. We have to define what the real cause is here. But even from there, now we can also then turn around once they get out of the facility, whether they go to Indian Rivers for treatment or they go to our Second Chance program that the judge has helped with also. And then you've got the community corrections, which is Hayes's baby, and stuff. So it's so there's a lot more options, and it's a lot more functional today. So I think that is having an impact in our community, because I think we're hitting it at every level. And it's very important that we do it, because if one of those steps are left out, then the ball's going to be dropped right there, and it kind of stops the rest of it from working.
And I would add, I think part of the challenge here, the behaviors brought on by opioids are very different they're not headline grabbing. When we talk about what I see and what the extreme behaviors, people jumping out of cars, ripping their clothes off, running around in traffic, it's not opioids. So that does get a lot of the headlines and a lot of the attention. That is definitely the things that drive people into my court or through North Harbor. When you have opioids, which it's like a CNS depressant, and the things that are used to treat that people get addicted to, then you get into fentanyl and all those issues. They want their drugs, and they want to kind of sit back and do their drugs, and they're not necessarily running out in the road. And the stuff that you see that drives the behavior that the law enforcement officer responds to, they may be intoxicated driving, that kind of issue, but the behaviors are so different that I think it triggers different responses. So we see things, and the trends we pick up on are just more visible in some types of drugs other than, perhaps opioids. So
Another thing I will bring up is something that we're making a big push on right now, and if y'all hear about this in any facet, please help us along with this. The judge is working on this. This is a crisis intervention center. They've got it in some other parts of the state. I can't tell you how important that is also, because that will allow that first step when we interact with somebody on the street, law enforcement or whatever. It will allow us somewhere to take this person to when it doesn't reach the level of taking them to North Harbor. It doesn't reach the level of having to maybe take them to the jail, or it gives them an option. Instead of going to the jail, you're going to go here to the Crisis Intervention Center. Now, if you try to leave, if you're intoxicated or something, then you're subject to going to jail for public intoxication. But it gives an option. But the key here is this allows them that opportunity for a counselor to reach out and talk with this person. Several of us went out to San Antonio and saw a program they've got out there, which is incredible. It involves homelessness, but it also involves just drug use in general. They said it takes about 3 times for an individual to go within the Crisis Intervention Center before they actually decide they want to reach out for help. But think how much better that is to help them on that side than it is for them to come in jail, because it's really not, the jail is really not the place, especially for somebody with a mental illness. That's a pet peeve of mine. It's like I always bring up, and y'all have heard me say 1,000 times, it's like me going to DCH and taking somebody to the jail for having cancer.
Yeah.
It's a disease, it's an illness. So that's not the place for that. And it's sad when we see that in the jail. That's why I'm so big about the mental health treatment within the jail that we can give. But if we can get that Crisis Intervention Center, I truly feel that it will be a game changer in our community.
Well, thank all of you all for peeling back the layers and putting your feet to the ground to get it working, to get us started in the right direction. Because like you said, mental health definitely plays a big role in it across the board. Got one more question going.
Corlina. Hi, I'm Corlina, and I'm a prevention specialist here with P.R.I.D.E. My question is for Sheriff Abernathy. Do you think the opioid use that we're seeing in the West Alabama area arises primarily from a person getting addicted to what's been prescribed to them, or something that they have obtained illegally?
Yeah, the narcotics agents, and we have West Alabama Narcotics, if y'all are familiar with that. It's a task force that UA Northport does. So it's truly across the entire county, and predominantly what we're seeing is it's illegally obtained. I mean, we still have prescription, like what the judge was talking about, but that's at nowhere close to the level that we're seeing on the illegal side of it.
Can I say something about that? And this isn't to say, if it comes illegally or via prescription, but when I think about opioids, one of the things I think about in other pill use, when you think about the college students in particular, you hear about farm parties and this sort of stuff. And to me, it's important that we as adults, consider our own role in this and in normalizing the notion in our young children, that they need something out of a yellow bottle. And they grow up, being told by the people that they trust the most, their parents or doctors, hey, you need this in order to be normal. And then by the time they get to the experimentation age, 15, 16, 17, now we stand back, in wonderment and wondering why in the world, would you be doing this? Well, we've been telling you since you're 5, 6, 7 years old, you need this stuff. And now I've been taking mine, but now as I'm 15, 16, 17, I may not be taking mine, or I'm taking more of mine because, hey, it's fine because you all told me it's okay, but now I can take yours and yours too. Right, and I think it is very important that we look at ourselves and our own actions here, and anything we could be doing, as we might be contributors to this mindset, normalizing the use of prescription meds within the children and stuff.
Hi, my name is Kenna Young. I am a prevention specialist with P.R.I.D.E of Tuscaloosa, and I have a question mainly for the sheriff, but if you guys have anything to add, please do. With fentanyl becoming more and more popular and people purchasing opioid pills and it coming out to be fentanyl and you find out through ways of overdose or reaction, what is the step that we're as a community hopefully taking to prevent fentanyl deaths, as well as educating people on the risk of fentanyl pills that they're buying or distributing?
Well, the key thing is what you said, is education. And I've been doing this for 33 years, and so I've seen all types of our scenarios go through. When beginning it was crack, and we went crack and meth and cocaine and heroin, and it typically, I personally think a lot of it's driven by whatever DEA sets out to stop. It stops that one particular substance from coming through, but it actually opens the door for other ones, okay? And I think that's what you saw with the heroin, when you saw the influx of the heroin and you saw all the deaths associated with it. And what was truly happening with that was they were not cutting it properly. Why? Because it was so cheap. The market got flooded, they weren't cutting it, so guess what? Somebody took heroin and their heart couldn't handle that level, because you've got somebody that's cutting it that has no clue what they're really doing, okay? And I think that's the same thing you see here. Whatever it is, we have to determine what those issues are, what those drug issues are at an early point where we can actually get on the front side of it. The same way we did with the synthetic marijuana. If y'all remember, a couple of years ago, you had the synthetic marijuana that was being laced with the rat poisoning. I think everybody remembers the people looking like zombies, their eyes turning red, all that situation. All of us came together and we were able to get that information out in a rather quick way to notify the public of that. And I think that goes back to the Crisis Intervention Center, our troops on the ground, our narcotics agents out here, what they start seeing quickly, and then educating our community in a quick manner to address that. So I think that's the key, is with fentanyl or any other drug, is to make sure as soon as it hits and we start to see that uptick, to make sure that we get that out there, because the way it's basically being presented is, here, take this, it's a great high, and there's no problems. Every one of them starts off like that until it is a problem. To somebody's having a convulsions, to somebody's dying, they're in ICU and all those things. Go ahead, Hayes, you have anything?
I'm Carson Armstrong, and I'm a prevention specialist with P.R.I.D.E Tuscaloosa as well. My question is for Sheriff Abernathy. Are you seeing issues with kratom even though it's banned in the state of Alabama?
No, I haven't heard a whole lot about it here recently, and I was talking with my agents, and they're not seeing, a major issue from that standpoint. You still have some convenience stores from time to time will slip this in, to try to do it. That's one problem that we've faced all along, is that a lot of these drugs that you see at the gas stations and convenience stores that they sell, when they make a law to stop it, they're making the law that says it can't have this particular substance in it, or this level of a substance in it. Well, what do? They immediately change to another one similar to it, or decrease the amount of it. And so it is a constant battle for us dealing with this over and over about what's legal and what's illegal. And we'll probably get into some more drugs as we discuss with this panel as it moves forward. But one of the big things we face with too is when we see somebody out here driving erratic and we stop them for driving under the influence, well, we have to prove that case, correct? Well, what if we have no way to even determine what it is they're even on? And that's what we're seeing with some things, because some of this is, quote, legal. You see? And so it's making it very, very difficult for the officer on the street to try to manage some of those. But as far as that goes, it's not, they said it's not as big of a problem as it has been, but you'll still see it from time to time. And typically somebody will let us know, parents or somebody going in these convenience stores will let us know, and they go out and they address it immediately.
I think the two trends that I could say over the last 2.5 years since I've been in office and hearing probate cases, the growth, and looking back historically, the growth in the college age probate cases, okay? Petition for involuntary commitment. And early onset dementia, we have a growing population that ends up on the upper end of the spectrum as far as age, that seeing a lot more of that as well. But I would say about 80% of the college age, I'll say 24 and under, have something to do with some form of a synthetic they got involved with that I see. Now, some of them just a history of mental health issues, but I've seen them come back from out of state with full athletic scholarships they lost. They'll sit there and tell me that their tattoos talk to them. I mean, they're out of their way of thinking. That's a nice way to put it. And this is not something that just happened. This is they smoke this stuff just in a recreational setting, much like the sheriff states. Just, you don't know what you're getting. You don't know what's in it. It's not controlled. That's the part that if folks would sit and think, it is kind of funny. They'll sit and they won't take a vaccine, but they'll go take anything off the street. I'm like, well, how do you figure that one out? It's not logical, but it is kind of what we wrestle with. But it's really concerning. And I think the education part of making folks aware of the trends before the damage is done. When I was a narcotics agent in the early 90s. I worked in law enforcement. I was with West Alabama Narcotics Squad. And during my period there, worked undercover and overt and covert, and we didn't see heroin. Very rarely did you come across some heroin in this county in that day. That was in 93 to 94 time frame. A lot of crack. Crack was starting to wane a little bit. Powder cocaine. Meth was a trucker drug. Trucker and bikers. That was it. I mean, it was, you'd see it, there'd be hallucinogenic activity. I remember a few calls we worked with, but not real prolific. But what's with the chemistry that's grown and improved and where things are today over that day, very, very different. And the ability to get anything that I mentioned, plus, and they just keep deriving new mixtures and compounds to elicit reactions. X was starting to come in, and kind of the boutique pharmaceuticals, and it was a different day. But as we all know, the trends keep changing, and I think the best thing y'all can do, keeping that mindfulness out in front of people, that maybe nobody's telling them. I mean, this thing with the synthetics, people literally, they're spraying it and they see it. Well, it's on some kind of vegetative matter. Oh, it's natural. Why? Because you have some weeds that in there, that some old potpourri, whatever it is you're smoking. We just need to get them to slow down and think. I wish I could show some videos of some of the testimony and some of the people that come before in the court that have lost it all in literally in one Friday night, from someone handed them something and they're sitting there looking at me and they don't know what world they're in anymore. And it's kind of back to the days of LSD, and when that was the big trend. In the 70s it was PCP, people jumping off angel dust, jumping off buildings, and it's the behaviors that get our attention, as I said earlier. And we just have to keep putting it out there and making them aware of these dangers, because you don't see it. until you see something happen and you say, well, they must have been on drugs. Well, a lot of that's preventable, but that's what we see.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I think, like with meth, and the judge is hitting the nail on the head again. You had the before and after pictures. We all remember that, right? Incredible. Couldn't do anything. To me, that was the most eye-opening thing you could put right in front of a kid and say, this is what he looked like beforehand. This is how he is now, okay? Well, I really wish we could kind of do that with what you're talking about, Judge, is go out here and get these individuals, and unfortunately, it's people that are just like us in here, communicating just like we are, and literally can't communicate at all afterwards. I mean, you can tell there's been a dramatic impact. It's basically almost like a severe brain injury type situation. Yeah, that's what it is. And I wish and that's the key, I think, for us to take from here is y'all go back and do what y'all do best, which is educate the youth of our community. Because that's where every one of these programs, that's where it's all started at, is making sure you can educate. When I started at the jail, back then it was crack, and I'll never forget, I had a guy I went to school with, and he had a great sheetrock company. He got out of high school and was doing this, making all kinds of money. It was fantastic. He was doing very well. I see him in the jail, and I'm like, what in the world went on, man? I said, what happened, And he told me, he said, look, he said, at that time it was $10 for a crack rock. He said, heck, I can afford this. I'm making tons of money. This is nothing. This will make me feel good. I'm living on top of the world. But then he started going to the ATM 25 times a night, getting every dime out he could. And he said the high he got the first time, every time after that, he couldn't reach it. So he was always going after it. And that's what, we've got to teach these kids early on, and that's why we have to determine what's happening, because this is a war we're in about especially when we're dealing with other countries where they're making new stuff all the time to ship over. And the sooner we can determine what that is, then we can make our kids aware of it and maybe keep them from doing it.
The whole industry, and there's only one thing that drives all this, and people have to realize nobody's your friend. And I learned this quick in narcotics. We were doing operations. It's money. It's just money and greed. They don't care what they sell as long as there's a buck in it. Who it hurts, that is not even part of the calculus. Now, they don't want to lose a customer. They'd rather keep selling the drugs. But that's just the reality that drives so much of this. And I think a lot of our young folks are naive in understanding that that's really what all this is about, and they don't matter to these people. It's all about that dollar, and that's reality.
All right, DA, we're going to ask you one of the last questions. What should I know about opioid laws? For example, driving with another person's prescription bottle, being asked by law enforcement if I'm under the influence of opioids, etc.
It's not illegal to possess them. It's illegal to unlawfully possess them. And the way that most commonly I think law enforcement on the street is going to be able to make that determination is whether or not somebody's got a prescription. Because if they do, then obviously they're good to go. But you can also have, and I don't know what pharmacy regs are now. It may be that they no longer do this. Releasing drugs, yours to me. I bring them home to you, right, from the pharmacy. If they give them to you, you are not unlawfully possessing them. I mean, you without a prescription because you're the wife, or I'm getting them for you. I'm not in trouble because I'm the husband, right? It could be siblings or whatever. You could have a friend picking them up for you, and it's absolutely not an issue. But I think it becomes difficult to explain why do I have these in my possession if I'm not now taking them to you because you're homesick, for instance. And so certainly then, and with their widespread abuse, there's going to be the belief that you are unlawfully possessing them. And I think law enforcement typically, again, they're going to make that determination based on whether or not there's a prescription. So I think that's what you'll find. And what was the second part of that? That's it.
I think you got me. Yep. If it's okay with Jamie, we're gonna let Jennifer ask a question and then I'll ask the last one, or everybody's gonna go around. Okay. So Jennifer, we can go ahead with you.
This is a double question for the Sheriff and DA Webb. I'm Jennifer with P.R.I.D.E. Tuscaloosa. I'm a prevention specialist. Sheriff, what is the most commonly used opioid in our area? And DA Webb, what is the most common opioid you're seeing arrests and convictions for right now?
I actually checked with our narcotics agents, and because I don't know, and it's interesting, our folks, our lawyers, were not able to tell me, just off the top of their head. They see oxys, which I think is oxycodone and hydrocodone, were the two heard from them and from law enforcement is what I think is most commonly seen now.
Yeah, I would agree with Hayes right there. That's what they tell me is that, and then of course heroin and stuff. They're still seeing some of that out there, but that would be our primary thing that we're running across.
Hello, I'm Gerardrick Parker. I'm a prevention specialist with P.R.I.D.E. of Tuscaloosa. And my question is for our very own Ms. Nicole Shine. How can a concerned friend or loved one offer support to someone they suspect is using opioids?
I would say first identifying what those triggers are and trying to support them by giving them the tools and resources to kind of figure out how to help them with that. Because like Ms. Liz said earlier, most of the time it's an underlying issue, right? If they're trying to cope with something and or if they're in just using with their friends. So I would first try to identify what those triggers are and provide them with the tools and resources for them to get help when they want to get help. Because just like I know several of you guys said up here, a person has to want to get help first before they actually decide to go into treatment. It has to be something they want. I hope I answered your question. All right, I think we got one more. We're going to go with David.
Hello, I'm David DeBose. I'm an intern here at P.R.I.D.E. And as some of you may know, Alabama leads the nation in opioid dispensing rates per capita. So how does that, along with how available it is, price, risk, availability, and perceptions of normalcy, how does that increase or decrease, or how does opioid use respond to all of those factors? Thank you.
Well, I'll start off first and say, of course, the more prescriptions there are out there, the more you have, the more availability, of course, it is. And the other side of it is you've got some individuals, kids that aren't even actually use it, will steal it to sell it, and so you run across that aspect of it also. So that's, anytime there's more of it, you're going to see more use, you're going to see more availability, and of course we do deal with that, and we see that across the spectrum.
I think that all of our staff have asked all of the questions that were given to us by the community. So thank you guys for participating by doing that. Our last question is going to be something that you guys can kind of help us with as one of the prevention agencies here, the only substance abuse prevention agency here in Tuscaloosa. What do you think we can do as a prevention agency to support our community in overcoming the opioid crisis? What can we do more? What would you like us to see us do more? Just give us a little charge that we can end this conversation with today.
Well, I guess I'll start off. I'm the one with the target on me now. No, actually, this has been incredible, and I love the opportunity to get out here and talk with everybody about it because it is such an important topic, and y'all are seeing this firsthand. And again, I cannot stress to you the importance of education for the young people and how much I appreciate the fact that y'all are out here doing this, because y'all are another level that prevents it even from coming to me, which is what I want. You know, so I think we need to come up with game plans. We need to work. If y'all take an initiative on something, please let me know. We will definitely work with y'all with it. We have in the past. I've had, when we had the issue with the out on the university about potential drug use involving the bar setting out there, we worked with P.R.I.D.E in regards to making sure we got information out to that particular area and putting posters up and putting things out. So it's very important, and we are very eager, the sheriff's office is, to work with y'all in anything. And if y'all see something new or y'all hear something as you're talking to your clients and people, please let us know, because you know what? You're probably going to hear it before I hear it. That's the truth of it, okay? And we want to jump on the front end. So please just keep educating, and let me know whatever I can do to assist you. I will be glad to do.
Yeah, relationships I do think are great, you know, as we work together, and we work great together. We've worked with P.R.I.D.E in the past, and happy to do anything we possibly can to support y'all. I do have a separate question though, you know, something's raised here, because despite education, you know, I mean, when I was young, growing up in the 70s, early 80s, you know, we had classes. We had police officers come to class and tell us how bad drugs were, you know. And despite that, so there's the education. But despite education, some people still, you know, choose, they're not stumbling upon typically these drugs, not knowing the consequences. You know, obviously with the synthetics and stuff, they may not be fully aware. Obviously, if something's laced with fentanyl, they don't, you know, they're not aware of that, right? But otherwise, when somebody says, hey, I want to go take Lortabs, hey, I want to go smoke crack, hey, I want to go smoke meth, what is that? Because y'all have taught them in the schools, right? We've taught them in the homes. And so what is that, right? I mean, that's what we have to be able to address. You know, because all the laws that we pass also, what happens, right? Okay, drug A is illegal. Okay, good, what do? Oh, we're done. No, they don't. Then they go to drug B. B's illegal. Okay, new law, A and B are illegal. Okay, so what do? Stop? No, they go to C. You know, and if that doesn't work, what are they doing out here? Sucking off aerosol cans, tailpipes, gasoline? What is that? They know what the dangers are, right? And so it's not, obviously there are some people who benefit from education, but there's another group that don't. And why is that? Wouldn't that be great to be able to figure out why there's a certain group that doesn't get it based on education, and figure out how to deal with them and what it is that drives and motivates their desires for what is frequently terribly destructive substances?
And I think coming from y'all is so much more important, truthfully, because we show up in a uniform and they're going to be standoffish to us. They're going to think we don't know, you know, we can't relate, but they can to other people their age and just civilians, you know, in general. And I haven't seen it directly, but the vaping situation that we've got going on now that y'all see basically everybody doing, I mean, there's no doubt that's going to turn into something much more serious, in my belief, because I think they'll find a way to take that and change it into something that will be even stronger or more useful. So if y'all come across anything like that again, if y'all will see this before I see it, okay, please let us know where we can try to address it on the front side.
Yeah, I'd add, before I make my last comment, to just what the sheriff said 2 weeks ago. Had a young man, and his situation was buying synthetic THC off the internet. You know, he couldn't tell you who or where it came from, but vaping was his method of delivery. And needless to say, I don't know if he'll come back out of it. He ended up going back out of state. He was an out-of-state student here, but he's back home now in a psychiatric facility, and it's not pretty. It's not a pretty situation. But building on what the sheriff and district attorney have said, y'all are in a wonderful position because you're put in front of younger people when they're still, yeah, they may be believing some lies, but you're right there in front of them where you can counter the propaganda so many times. And I can tell you're a group that it cares deeply. You're good at relating to younger people. That's where the difference can be made. We clean up the back end. What you see across the stage, we're like the end of the rope, sadly. I'm dealing with them when they've got a mental health condition, or something I didn't allude to, I'm seeing where we do minor guardianships, conservatorships, adoptions that were a product of drug addiction. The parents are incarcerated, all of it starts wrapping together, the lives come apart, and then I have the child that we want to get placed into a much better environment. So that's a whole nother side of this family dynamics. But, I have that side of it, and Sheriff, obviously, you've got the enforcement side and the jail side, so you're having to deal with the incarceration and all that comes with that, and then our district attorney, of course, the prosecutor, on behalf of the state, trying to enforce an action, and oftentimes it involves a option for rehab if substance are involved, they have to want to participate. So we're kind of the back end, we're the backstop. And oftentimes you feel like you're just like a dog chasing a car, because it's running wild. We're trying to intervene and clean up the back end, but you're in the front. And I would encourage you just to do exactly what you're doing, helping get that word out. Anything we can do from the mental health side of things, and I know that's been stated up here. I know these guys, anything that will help to get a message or examples or, we're glad to help. Thank you.
Well, I think we're going to close it out. Thank you guys so much. If I can tell you 1,000,000 times thank you, I don't think it would be enough. You guys definitely took the call to come in and step in with us to be on this panel. So thank you all again. That's it for us. To all of our people out there virtual, definitely look out for other things that we have going on with Pride. We're not only in the schools, we're going to be out in the community because I think that is so important. Until next time.